One second. And I think we're live. Yeah, we are. Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another weekly meeting for the working group of Merge Request Report Widgets. I believe this is the 14th edition of this call. I could be wrong. I'll check later. And we'll cut straight into the announcements. Peyton is not on the call, so I'll just read out his point. Welcome, Jeremy. Sorry for keeping you in the waiting room. I missed you there. So Peyton had announcements. Polling is now ready. All you have to do is put enable polling true in your extension options and we take care of the rest. If polling is not working for you, ensure that the backend endpoint is properly set up for you to work. I'm still working out a few things on my end, testing wise. So yeah, the backend is preparing with, has to be prepared with the headings and stuff, the headers, if I believe. And any questions on that note on the real time, on the polling aspect of the widgets? All good. Excited to see this working. So if not, I don't think we have any other announcements. So let's go for Marcel. You have the first discussion item. Go for it.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to just check how you all feel about when we're going to switch the feature flag to the new MR widgets. And I added the additional info that of the 9 widgets we have, 3 are already in the new design. 2 are going to be redesigned, currently planned in milestone 14.8, if the issue milestones are correct. And the 4 other ones are going to be worked on in 14.9. So I just wanted to get a quick check from everybody how they feel about this.
Yeah, we have discussed this in the past. Technically, we can do however we want, whether we want to enable the mix and match of like having some widgets in the new layout, some widgets in the old layout. This is technically possible. In terms of consistency on the UI, I think we can all agree that would be best to have the whole thing look the same. It would be a far better first impression. I have a personal preference of potentially waiting for all the widgets to be done by 14.9, even with some potential slippage to 14.10. I feel like that could give us a lot more good feedback about turning it all at once, even though it will delay the user feedback. I don't know. I'm leaning to wait for 14.10, which is contrary to our values of like shipping work solutions and keeping things moving. But I don't know. What is everyone's thoughts?
I like the sooner we roll out, the better. I feel like there's work being done. It would be kind of good that we could get it on GitLab.com. We can test out if there's any bugs that get brought up that we make. At least then we know.
Yeah, early feedback. I understand. I don't think we've ever done this, but I wonder if we could provide with the user a way to revert back to the old ones. It would complicate the check a little bit. Yeah. Marcel, from your perspective, what are you leaning towards?
Yeah, it's a tough question. About the topic of early feedback, when we did a lot of changes for the left sidebar on the navigation, we had these enabled for specific users in our own team. So they could see this across the entire part of the product and also over the entire day, instead of just going to a specific part of the product on a specific time. So maybe that could already be a good idea. Maybe we can just enable this for maybe even all of the GitLab employees. That could give us enough early feedback so that we don't have this weird visual of mix and match for our customers. Maybe that could be a good combination. Already enabling it rather soon for the GitLab employees, get the early feedback, and still waiting for 14.9, 14.10 to release them to all users, to hopefully have them all visible at once.
Are we able to turn on by user groups? Or
well, we could turn on by user ID, but I don't know if we can do by groups.
Right. So there have to be a list of users. That feels like
like 1,000 plus employees of user IDs.
Well, there's another possibility, which is the rollout process is first we roll out for specific projects. We can start off there, start rolling out the new widgets, but then you'd have GitLab, say GitLab orgs projects. They would be showing this mixed merge request widgets, which again, whether we either accept it or we don't accept it from the usability perspective, because then the rollout, we always want to have to go through that process of slow rolling it out to certain projects, see the feedback. So that's always going to happen. The question is whether we want to even see that mix in production presented to users or not.
I guess the place where we're going to get the most feedback is the GitLab project. Seems the project that most people look at.
That tends to be. The question is whether we run per project or per users.
Start with onions. Start basically with the website project, and you have 99.9999% just GitLab employees. Some side projects like Git delete, a runner, and so on and so on. And you have way more engineering teams. And finally, do GitLab itself, the project, because then you have employees, contributors, plus others in that realm. Make sense?
It does. It does. We can select whichever projects we want. And I feel like that would, and again, just because we start turning it on doesn't mean that we can't turn it off if something drastic happens. So yeah, I feel like that's the good intermediate approach. Since we are pursuing them, the implementation of the widgets for 14.9, 14.10 at most, it feels like it wouldn't be in that state for long. So as we roll out one per week, it will give us the time that we need to get to the finalized. By the time that we end up the rollout, we might just go and just turn everything on. I feel like that's a good approach. Any objections? All right, we'll put that in bold so that we know that that's what we do. Thanks, Marcel, for bringing it up. Yannick.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of weeks ago, I opened up a few issues for a widget. Those features are still missing to migrate the license compliance to use our new extensions. Got those issues linked into the agenda. We can speak about them in detail for now, but what I'm after a little more, which is a bit on top of things, is I just got the question that where those tasks fall into priority and timing. And I struggle to answer this. And don't get me wrong here, yet to be refined or in our backlog is a totally valid answer, but I was struggling to find any kind of documentation on the process on how we are approaching prioritization and timings. So curious about the feedback. And if there's enough time and we want to do this, let's go jump into the issues and see what we can do.
Thanks, Yannick. So far we've been doing it ad hoc. I've been thinking whether we should have a particular label, because the working group label will stop being used from the moment that the working group ceases to exist. And the idea is that the working group will be finite in time. So my proposition would be to follow the example of, for example, transient bugs, where we have a permanent label that will live on after the working group. And we can mark those issues with that label. That's the first part, which is to have an easy way to catch all work from this working group that needs to be scheduled. And then the workflow labels will be like ready for development, all that stuff can help out with the rest of prioritization. We do have to find a way to make this visible to the relevant engineering managers and teams. But then once we have the label, we can start preparing issue boards that can help make that visible. And still the best way is to still have some sort of responsible people looking at those topics. So for example, for the core widget, we can start designating groups that are owning each part. So for example, the core of the widget could be owned by the code review group. We could be responsible for prioritizing that, whether we do it ourselves or we find other people outside of the group to do it. We can take care of the prioritization. The other widgets, so for example, you have some things here. You had one question for the security widget or for the license compliance widgets. So those have obvious owners. So what I would say is like the person who's interested in that issue should definitely tag the EMs on those groups. That comes with like a direct ownership of each widget. Like this, I don't know, I'm guessing Secure would own the security widget, and that can be documented definitely to ping them once you have work for that. For the core, I think what I'm more worried is about designating a process for the core updates. Things that need to be updated in the core component is where we have to coordinate more with UX and front end and potentially even back end. But I'm happy to take the code on the ownership from the code review perspective of coordinating, not necessarily executing, if that makes sense. We don't want to be the bottlenecks, but we are able to be the connectors, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make a lot of sense. So that sounds like a pretty good approach and a pretty structured approach to be had. How are we gonna deal with those specific issues? Like, do we want to set this up now and basically make these three things the very first issues to be properly labeled and go through this process, or how do we feel about that?
For these particular issues, I already left a comment on each one of those three. I have some questions for each one of these, and I think the existence of these issues is exactly why this working group was formed, because a lot of these things that we have done, there's a reason for them to be restrictive. So for example, the first one, when you asked the support extensions that don't require multiple requests, the fact that we did that is to protect the performance of the whole page in the beginning. Now, there might be some cases where the widget doesn't do like super heavy lifting on the requests, but the reason why we did with multiple requests, if I'm not mistaken, Phil, please correct me, was to exactly separate that thing. Load first the summary data, and then once you have the expansion of the widget by the user, then you can load the rest of the data. But that's why we need to discuss this further to understand what's the use case for this particular widget, to see if having that all in one request wouldn't be prone to harming the performance of the page at large, if that makes sense.
It does, and I'm looking forward to the discussion, because we might need to have some breaking changes in the API. We'll see how it turns out.
Of the core component or on the backend?
On the backend.
Okay. That, I think that's a fair thing to expect, and let me explain. Okay. So we shouldn't coerce the core component of the merge request report widgets just because the backend API already exists, if that makes sense. So we should definitely probably have to do some further development on the backend, which could be a blocker given that there's some priorities running on the backend, but that's what we expect. Yes, there might be you might have to do some adaptations on the backend to split the request in two, but the good thing is that the end result will be better for performance. We'll load a far quicker summary, not use all the memory. And then once the user expands the widget, then we request a big payload. And that was by design, if I'm not mistaken. Phil? Thanks for the sanity check.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah, the other things, let me just, so switch the text link order. I feel like that's totally reasonable and doable. It's just a matter of getting the UX to give us the go ahead, and we find a way to implement that. The uncollapsed state thing, if it's supported by the UX framework, great. But it's also another thing that we have to see that we don't steer towards being too permissive. Because one of the concerns we had was just to not have a huge height of merge request widgets. So if we're having sections that are in the uncollapsed state, then that creates that possibility. Is that supported at all by the UX framework, Marcel? Jeremy?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. If you follow this link that I'm highlighting, the add support for sections and extensions in collapse state, there's a screenshot thing I think there.
Yeah, I commented in there.
Yeah, is this expected to exist by the UX framework? Uncollapsed sections being in the widget?
So the question, uncollapsed sections, yes, that is part of that, like level 2. So the level 1 is still collapsible, but that level 2 is that's fully expanded. So
Okay.
that's the default. The only difference here is that it has those extra like the title and the descriptor. So yeah, if you look at all the examples, like all those section 2s, the level 2s, I should say, they're expanded. So yeah, this is correct.
I think I was just misreading the uncollapsed, the negative. Yeah, that actually makes sense. So this is when the widget is open, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. When the parent level 1 is open, the level 2s are like fully visible for whatever content is within them. We looked at originally keeping those collapsed or scrolling within those, but we didn't want it to be too much friction to have to expand one and then expand all. If you've already intentionally expanded that level 1, you're wanting to see that content, so let's show it. So
thank you so much. That was me misreading the whole situation. That's on me.
And apologies for not following along a little tighter here.
That's fine. You helped. Thanks. Okay, so Yannick, coming back to that, let's follow up the discussions on the issues, and they will be considered for prioritization for the upcoming milestone. So this is a great moment. What I was actually thinking is exactly to document something, which goes to my last point. Document something about having labels, but then having potentially a group, not a group call, but basically have a group of people be responsible for looking at these labels every milestone. So before the start of every milestone, before the planning of the milestone, like we do for performance work, like we do for security issues, grab another pipeline that would look at these particular source of issues. And this would actually fall into my groups. So it's something that we can totally do in supporting. Again, not that we will execute them, but we will coordinate them as a kind of I don't like the word of gatekeepers, but the gatekeepers of merge requests. It makes sense to be the code review to take a look at that and then bring in the appropriate people into the fold and get them to work on it. Good. Any further comments on this one? Okay. Any objections of having an actual label for post working group? I'll come up with a label. I don't think we have them yet. I'll come up with a label post working group and add it to the project so you can start using them. And then eventually an issue board plus documentation update to reflect it. Speaking of documentation, I'll move on to my next point. I wanted to get an update on documentation, or at least to raise this topic again, because if you remember, the idea for this working group was to have it complete their goal or exit criteria by the end of Q4. So by the end of this quarter, we should be able to dismantle the working group and have a process in place to support the evolution of the report widgets. In that, 2 of the exit criteria that we have, and again, congrats for everyone and thanks for the work that you've been doing on improving the core components and rewriting the extensions. It's been great to see that evolution. We're getting very close to the exit criteria to being fulfilled. These 2 are the ones that I'm more worried about because I don't think we've had a lot of work done, but also it was too early. So now we're getting to that time that it's good to have this conversation. What needs to happen here, or who will own this particular part of the process is my question. Because we want to have a way for people that have to refactor a widget to know exactly where to look, have some guidance technically, because the UX framework already provides the UX guidance, but the technical guidance is what I'm worried. I'm worried about the technical guidance from engineering perspective and also technical writing that I've already reached out to Amy Qualls, our technical writer in Create. I already reached out to her and she's already on top of it. She will think about something to write down some orientations on the copy to make sure that the copy is consistent throughout the widgets. So that's already being looked at by her. But from our perspective, engineering wise, what's our idea? Do you have something in mind? Do you feel like we don't need it? What are your thoughts?
Will these be in GitLab UI at some point?
Phil?
Which part? Sorry.
I mean the core components?
Just these components, the framework itself.
Did we discuss this at some point? We decided it probably wasn't the best thing to put into GitLab UI.
I think so. Yeah. In the beginning, I think if we search,
I can't remember. We wrote that down there.
I think what we decided is that these involve network requests and a bunch. So these would be too smart of a component to put in GitLab UI, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
So yeah, the answer is no, unless something changes or unless the GitLab UI starts supporting some of the different kinds of components. But I think the answer is no. So then my question is about so my idea would be to have some sort of technical documentation on the project itself. Like we have technical documentation for front-end practices. We already have a section for this particular core component. I don't know if I'll be able to find it now, Googling it, but we already have something in the doc pages, right, Phil? That you wrote.
Yep. It's just super minimal. Not much there.
Do you think that we can expand that and that could become the home?
I don't see why not.
So I found it. Currently, we have this. Could we evolve this? And you said, I don't see why not. All right. So who would be responsible for this? Is this something that we can delegate? Because I see, for example, now we're getting to a place where we already have a way to specify all types of content for the sections and all that stuff. It would be a good moment to capture those options and examples of code into the documentation, but we still have our resources filled up by actually doing the work. So it'd be good to have some external help writing that documentation, but it's also technical. Phil, I'm mostly concerned about protecting you because you still have work to complete for the support of the widgets. So I'm definitely. Do you think that you could author that or help someone else author that?
I mean, it probably makes sense me doing it the most. Since I'm the one who's been making the most amount of changes. I'm okay taking it.
You need a sidekick. You need someone else to help doing that, to have a sanity check so that to keep the documentation more useful. Do you want to find someone to help you with that? Okay. You can totally delegate to that person. You explain to that person authors. Maybe that's an idea so that you can still have time for that. So I'm going to find someone to help you evolve this. Okay.
Be happy to help with this, Phil, just in case nobody else wants to.
I think that's I volunteer. Thanks, Yannick. I really appreciate that.
Can we make an issue for that just so I can make sure I schedule some time?
Absolutely. Can we have an issue? Yes, I'll create an issue. Outline what we need to have from that documentation so that we have more idea. And having that issue will then help you also include Amy for revision and that sort of thing later. And we'll look into scheduling it already for this current milestone. Awesome. Cool. Anything else that we need to discuss? We have 3 minutes. There's one issue that was brought up before. I don't think we still have any outcome from the user experience side, which is this topic that Tim raised about the whole level 1 being clickable. I would really be keen on getting an outcome, whether it's something that the UX wants or objects or something like that. Would be interesting to get feedback. I'm not sure if we'll be able to implement it right away on 14.8, but still 14.9 would be a good moment to get on that. So I'll add that here just as a reminder. We need
both Pedro and I have weighed in on that.
But is there an outcome of like going or no going?
I think from a UX standpoint, we're okay moving forward with that if it's done in an accessible way, right? So even an MVC on that has to be accessible where, and that's unpacked further in there. But
okay, I found the issue. I'll take a look at that. And that makes sense. We have a couple of ideas to how to make that accessible. Oh gosh, 23 hours ago, I missed that.
I linked to some examples of how that's been done elsewhere too, and I think Pedro did as well. Or maybe Marcel.
Yeah, the cards that you showed is kind of like exactly the example that we have multiple links and then have a clickable area. We'll definitely make sure of that. So we'll see if we can have space and capacity for 14.8. If not, we'll pick it up soon after that. Thank you so much.
I might have missed something. What happens if there's action buttons inside of the row? What happens to them?
So basically you would have the whole row would be defaulting. If you click on the white space, if you click basically on a non-link, you just default to this principal action of expanding or something. But then if you click on the text of a link or something else, you'd go to that link specifically. Okay. So it wouldn't be an A element wrapping the whole thing. It would be some other way.
Okay.
Convenience, basically. It's just not forcing people to point to a chevron.
I'm lazy in moving mouse, so that's why I suggested it.
We all are. We're done. We have a few seconds to spare. Yay. Thanks for attending. Great to see everyone. Have a great week. See you next week.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.